We have, or we're going to have this finishing. I have that.
Net zero revenue bond.
Okay. I was wondering if you
three
talked
of
to
them.
them. Okay, so then, okay, we are going to reconvene our meeting with electric utilities, and Darren Springer, Burlington Electric.
Thank you. I think we were on that slide right here, and I was talking about the revenue bond, and I'll keep going and talking about the bond on the next slide if we can. One of the pieces here that's exciting for us with the revenue bond is by making the investment in the electric grid, we're also freeing up some capacity, some liquidity essentially that we have that we would otherwise need to use for reliability investments. And we're using that to help double the funding that's available for our customer incentives for what we call strategic electrification. So all the programs we put forward for electric vehicles, heat pumps, and I'll detail those in a moment, we have essentially double the funding from 2023 through 2025 that we would normally have. And that's a conscious decision because we are supporting larger, higher scale adoption rate for those technologies as an effort to move towards our net zero 2030 goal. So we actually are trying to be even more ambitious than the already fairly ambitious tier 3 requirements as a part of that. So I'll move to the next slide.
Can you just actually yeah. So actually, I think we need to do a little bit of a time check because we have 2 more utilities to hear from, and did the telecoms have flexibility?
Yes, I told them we may end up at like 3:15, and they're fine for 3:30. Yeah, they're fine. They understand.
Okay, so we probably have till about 3:15, 3:30, but we have 2 more to hear from.
I'll try to breeze through the remainder. Just here you can see a collection of our incentive programs that we offer. This is not comprehensive, but it's illustrative. We have incentives for our customers for everything from heat pumps to electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid vehicles, electric mowers, electric bikes, electric lawn equipment, electric transit buses, you name it, we're trying to incentivize it. And for a number of these programs, we have an enhanced incentive for our low and moderate income customers in order to try to make access to these technologies more affordable. That lines up well with a number of the state rebates that are available and federal incentives that are available. So on the next slide, you can see what I mentioned earlier, which is this is our tier 3 programs. And the blue is our adoption rate and the orange is the required amount. So we've consistently exceeded the required amount from the state for a few years now. And our intent is to continue to do that. Next slide, please. Here you can just see we launched this concerted effort to increase our incentives in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. We called it the Green Stimulus Effort. We launched it, and for heat pumps, as you can see, we have 20 times the number of residential heat pumps now than we did when we launched this incentive program in 2020. So we're seeing an impact for customers. On the next slide, just consistent with what I was saying for low and moderate income customers, the next slide shows our adoption rates for heat pumps and EVs relative to our low and moderate income customers. We've consistently seen about 15 to 20% of our incentives for heat pumps and electric vehicles going as enhanced incentives to our income eligible customers. We've been able to ramp that up. We want to ramp it up even more, but that's just the current data that we have on that. Next slide, please. Almost done. These are just some different innovation projects that we have happening in the city. I'll mention just briefly that we are working very hard on plant. We actually have an Act 250 filing that's going in shortly that is to help advance that project to a new stage of permitting and development. And this is the idea of taking waste heat and additional steam from McNeil, piping it underground to large customers like the hospital and UVM as a way to help decarbonize. And just because I was talking about it with Representative Pat, we do have a new pilot low income rate as well that offers a 12.5% discount for income eligible customers that is started as of July of last year. And next slide, please.
Can you, sorry to do this, but a little more on the timing for your using the heat.
Absolutely. So we've had 3 phases of feasibility work since 2018. And now we're submitting Act 250 filing. And our hope is in the first quarter of this year to have a sense of whether we have financial agreements among the key customers. If we do, and if we're able to advance it through permitting, The goal would be to have construction happen in 2023 and 2024 and operation towards the end of 24, early 25. Absolutely. I have two last slides. One is just to mention that we are actively engaged with the city of Burlington on city policies that complement our various programs. We enacted as a city rental weatherization standards in 2021, as well as a requirement for new buildings to have a renewable heating system also in 2021. And we're working under a charter change that the legislature and governor approved in 2022 and was voted on by voters town meeting day of 21 to advance even more ambitious policies. And there will be a ballot question for Burlington voters this town meeting day that's going to ask whether voters approve our use of a carbon impact fee along with requirements for new construction and large existing buildings. So this will be somewhat groundbreaking, I think, in the state of Vermont.
Representative Lowey, did you have a question?
Oh, may I follow up with you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Representative Sibilia and then Smith.
Carbon impact fee, PUC involved in that at all?
No, so this would be a local development fee, essentially a permit at the local level. Would require either use of renewable technology or in the alternative payment of a carbon impact fee.
Great to hear more about that.
Glad to talk about it. We will have a town meeting day ballot question that would enable that to move forward or not, depending on the vote. So that's a big topic of discussion in Burlington.
Representative Smith.
Thank you. You have breaks, you said 12.5% for heat pumps for low income.
The 12.5% is a bill discount for low income customers across the board.
This would be on heat pumps or anything?
It would be for their total electric bill. So
Okay.
we have enhanced incentives for low income customers. If they want to buy a heat pump, we give them an extra incentive. But if you're a low income customer signed up for our rate, you get a 12.5% discount on your electric bill.
Even if you're renting?
Correct.
So you said you mostly they're rentals that you.
That's right.
that
More
you-
of our residential rentals. That's right.
Are there low income families in Burlington that own homes?
Absolutely. Yes. And they also qualify for this rate
Okay, good.
as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
One more. Representative Lowey.
Sure.
Thank you. Do you have on-bill financing for many of these?
We do.
centers?
We have a history of on-bill financing for our small businesses. And now just recently with the VHFA and what's called the RAP tariff that was announced and funded by the legislature and the governor, we are offering on-bill financing for income eligible customers for heat pumps and weatherization. We just announced that last week, so very, very timely. And then I think the last slide here, I just wanted to touch on a few areas of state policy that we have interest in if the committee explores them further. One is something called Act 151, which was passed in 2020, that allows us as an efficiency utility to use a portion of our funds towards emission reduction measures as opposed to just electric efficiency measures. This is helping us with our heat pump incentives and some of our other programs. And I believe it's up for consideration this year as to whether there's an extension. So we'd love to talk with the committee more about that. Renewable energy standard, I mentioned we're 100% renewable, so we're treated differently under the renewable energy standard. We're in kind of a unique position relative to some other utilities because of that. And there might be things that get discussed in that context that might work well in some areas, but might actually harm us in Burlington. So I welcome the chance to come back and talk in more detail if the committee is taking that up. And then lastly, we'll also be paying attention to the Affordable Heating Act discussion, mainly around the idea of how our incentive programs could dovetail with programs that might be offered there and how that can work to meet our local climate goals in Burlington.
Great.
And hopefully I got through everything quickly, but in a helpful way.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for putting up with our emergency drill.
Madam Chair, may I just, not to answer now, but I did ask as the fire drill was breaking about the revenue bond
Yes.
for climate.
Yep.
And how that would be repaid and if that would be built into rates. So I'm not asking for an answer now, but I just wanted to put the question on the record and love to hear more.
Short answer is it is built into rates. It's part of our debt service. And we had a existing financing that had expired, was planned to be expired. So we're able to fill that gap essentially with this new revenue bond without a significant impact on our debt service as a whole. Short answer.
Yeah, sure. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Will you be able to shoot me an email so I can ask this?
VEC, Vermont Electric Cooperative.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Town. I'm CEO of Vermont Electric Cooperative, and I'm here with Andrea Cohen, who you will see a lot of at the State House, does a lot of our regulatory and legislative relations work. So I know I will do my best to be quick. I have a lot of slides here. I won't go through all of them.
I mean, you have 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, great. So I'll still probably skip some slides, but you can stop me whenever there are questions. So first slide, please, or second slide, if you would. I like to go after BED because we are very similar size. We're the second largest utility in Vermont, but we have very different geographic and member demographics. So this is our territory. We are a member-owned cooperative. That means that our board of directors is elected. These are actually our districts for our board of directors. We serve Canada, Champlain Islands, or up to Canada, over to New Hampshire. Pretty rural. There's a lot of cutouts in here for municipal utilities. But next slide, please. This gives you a sense, about 35,000 members. We are by load, half residential and half commercial and industrial. So think ski areas, hospital, those kinds of things. Different than BED, we are mostly homeowners. So that's unique for us when we think about people's energy transition. We have a lot of folks, we have an older demographic, we have a lot of folks on fixed income, and a lot of people who own their homes. So that makes a very different model for them when they're thinking about their own electrification of heat pumps and electric vehicles. In some ways an opportunity, in other ways more challenging on the financial side, more opportunity when you own your home and there's one decision maker. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this one because it's just a thank you for some of the things that have been incredibly meaningful for us over the last few years that we're still working on rolling out. So thank you for your work. Next slide, please.
Go back one.
Go back one. Thank you. So this is challenges and opportunities. This in a nutshell are the things that we see coming that we are most focused on. So decarbonization, of course, electrifying heating and transportation, that is first on our list on purpose. Second, of course, is thinking about energy equity and making sure that our rates are affordable and we're making that transition in a way that brings everybody along. We're thinking about reliability. Of course, we've always thought about reliability. Decarbonizing the energy ecosystem actually makes it more challenging, and climate change makes it more challenging. And our commitment has been there from the beginning around having a reliable grid, but it also expands now to thinking about cybersecurity and technology and other ways that we are necessarily committed to reliability. We have a grid that's changing a lot, so it's becoming more distributed while still also relying on a lot of centralized resources. So we're incorporating all kinds of new things on the grid a lot, and that makes it shifting, which for us, again, makes it really challenging to commit to that reliability. And then finally, making sure that we call them members, our customers. We're bringing them along and they've got choices. So someone who wants to just flick on the light switch and have it be affordable, great. Someone who wants to be very actively engaged and have solar and batteries and electric vehicle, that's great too. We want to serve all of those folks. Next slide. I won't spend time on this. I call this the Richard Scarry version of the energy future for those of you who read books, but effectively, these are all the moving parts.
I still read books for the record.
Or still read them. They're still wonderful. But these are not all, but a lot of the moving parts on the generation side, on the use side, on the storage side that are going to be changing and shifting as we move into that energy future. And it's a lot. So the yellow lines are transmission, the blue is distribution, and all of those pieces interplay on a regular basis. And each of them is speeding up in terms of how much they're interplaying. So this is our fun future. Next slide, thank you. Our board made a commitment to be 100% carbon free and 100% renewable. I am excited that it is January 2023 because we are now 100% carbon free in our energy supply on an annual basis. So that means the difference between renewable and carbon free for us is nuclear. We have about 15% nuclear. The majority of our power supply comes from Hydro-Quebec, large hydro. We also have a lot of in-state, about 30 megawatts of in-state wind and solar resources that are under contract with us as well. Slide, please. We talk about just transitions and energy equity. This is one of the ways I think about it. First and foremost, affordability, always. Secondly, thinking about as we make the energy transition, the opportunity is to think about how do we reduce costs for folks who can least afford their current energy burden. So this is a chart that is actually generated by Efficiency Vermont. It shows energy burden, which means total household dollars spent on energy, all energy, not just electricity, all energy as a percentage of their income. So the more orange it is, the more as a percent they pay for their energy, which means a higher energy burden. That's where more of their dollars are going. And if you look at the percentages of where those categories are, you'll see most transportation, then thermal, then electricity. So really, for a lot of folks, no surprise in rural areas, transportation and thermal are driving more of their energy spending. Yes.
And it's Sibelia.
Yes, Rebecca, can you just remind me where we can find that energy burden report?
Yeah, it's on the Efficiency Vermont website, but we
It's right
can
on-
send it to you. Yeah, it's right on the website.
Live so that you can like click towns and see the data? Is it dynamic?
Can't remember.
Great, sorry. I will find out.
The way we think about, though, as we're moving heating and transportation to electric, that's our opportunity to lower costs. So if we can keep electric rates affordable as we're moving people between categories, that's the moment to say, how do we lower your energy burden while we're transitioning your heating system, while we're changing your mode of transportation?
Representative Logan.
Thank you. Along the lines of just transitions, part of the idea of just transitions is creating, livable wage jobs. So made me want to ask, how many employees do you have, and how many employees do you expect to have as energy production grows as we electrify?
So currently we have 110 employees right now. And that is a great question around how many we expect. We're still trying to figure out, our job is to figure out how to get to that energy future in the least cost way possible. So we know that there is necessary growth, and we're trying to figure out how to add in the right places. What can we stop doing? So I don't know, a handful, but hoping to keep the labor limited as we think about how do we do things smarter, how do we use technology to do a lot of those things. And you didn't ask, but everyone does earn a livable wage at our organization. Next slide. You heard this from Darren. It's just a different way of showing the increasing adoption of electric technologies. So the blue is heat pumps. The sort of maroon color is what we call our clean air program, which is moving folks off generators onto electric grid, which think sugar makers, gravel pits, folks that have been previously using just diesel generators to run their operations. And now they want to reduce their carbon and have more reliable and more cost-effective energy. So we've been able to do some great projects there.
Is that just bringing them in as customers?
Yes. Well, what we'll do is we'll build a line extension to them. We'll help support the cost of that line extension. That's part of the way we create that incentive. And then they're able to move off that diesel generator onto electric. And also with sugar makers who've been a big piece of that, now that they have reverse osmosis and those types of things, that makes a lot of sense for them. They're using more energy than they ever did before. And then the little red line in there is electric vehicles, which is a smaller piece of the pie, but over time we expect that will grow and will be a really big piece of the energy transition. Next slide. This one's a little complicated, but basically it just shows that the black line is what we see as our annual energy use over the month. So this graph goes January to December. And the black line is how much energy we predict we'll be using in 2030. And then the other lines are not indicative of how much energy is being generated, but indicative of what we call the capacity of different renewable energy profiles. So you'll see biomass pretty consistent all the way across the top. There's onshore and offshore wind. Those have more variability between the seasons. They produce more in the winter and less in the summer. And then you'll see solar at the bottom, which produces a ton in the summer and then way less in the winter. So the point of showing this is simply that one of the ways we're focused on moving to a renewable grid is to also think about how do we serve every load at every season of the year. And each of these resources is going to be a necessary component of being able to serve that. So when we think about policy that supports one or the other, that creates additional cost impacts, then that means that's less we can spend on other things. So just a piece, when people ask about, what do we need, our annual meeting, we had a lot of questions about what about micro hydro, or what about micronuclear, or what about all these things? And when it comes to generation sources that are carbon free, our answer is all of the above. We will need more of all of the above in order to make this reliable grid work. Next slide, please. And when we talk to our members, again, a complicated slide, but basically what this is saying is they think local is better, regional is better, but more important than anything else, cost trumps everything. So they will, they're really looking at the total cost of their energy bill. They're looking to us to move to that renewable portfolio eventually by 2030, which is our commitment, in a way that is least cost for them. Next slide, please. I will skip this. You've probably seen this from the Department of Public Service. It just compares the policy outputs of some of the in-state renewable pieces. And again,
I would just say, Madam Chair, when we do get to RES, these are important things. We'll want to come back and
Yeah.
revisit with all of that.
yeah, so when you get to that, so these are just, I guess, priming you for what you're going to hear from us, which is an intense focus on cost and figuring out how we can make sure that we're continuing to build more renewable and building to that clean energy future. Next slide. Also, our focus is looking at regional. You'll hear a lot about, in-state and Vermont, and our perspective is that we cannot get to a reliable, affordable grid without using all of our regional strengths, which includes hydro from Canada, which includes offshore wind eventually, which we don't have contracts, but we're looking to develop those, which includes New York and Maine, who are able to do large wind projects and have hydro projects. So all of those things feed into our grid, and that's what's going to allow us to move to this intermittent renewable future in a way that has seamless reliability for all of our members. Next slide. This is just to make sure that you know that we are incredibly focused. We could spend a lot of time talking about the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. I put the "and" in the wrong spot, sorry about that. But we just over this past week have been spent a lot of time applying for grants in the first round of the Infrastructure Act. We've applied just VEC ourselves for between $10 and $15 million worth of infrastructure spending. If we get even a fraction of that, that is great news for our members. A lot of the utilities have been working with the DPS to apply for even greater amounts, particularly around energy storage and some technology to improve grid reliability. And the Inflation Reduction Act, that stuff hasn't even come out. That's going to be some exciting stuff that's going to be coming through the state. So we're really focused on it. We know this will take a ton of time and attention at the state level. And it feels like an incredible opportunity to think about how do we build this energy future where we need more robust, bigger wires, right? More infrastructure, a renewable, intermittent energy future. All of that has a lot of cost to it. And there is short-term some really great opportunities for us if we put in the work, and we are. Pause for any questions. You guys have already heard a lot today. Okay, let me go through the storm really quickly. Just a couple slides of photos from the storm for us, which was really devastating. You can move on to the next one. Just blew down a lot of things. And then you can move to the next one. So for us, this was a major storm. One of the top 10 in the last 10, 15, 22 years, 12 years, sorry, since 2010. And it started early in the morning on December 23rd. We finally wrapped up on December 28th. That's when we officially said everyone is restored. We had about a third of our system out at one moment in time, although over that storm, more than that of our system went out because we got people back on and then other people would go out. We had 47 broken poles. We are doing a FEMA application, so we are hopeful that that would potentially, if eligible, 75% of those costs get reimbursed from FEMA. And if it's FEMA eligible, one of the important things to know is that you get 75% of the storm reimbursed, and you can then apply for additional grants, which they call hazard mitigation, which effectively are resiliency grants. So then we go and apply for those to do projects, which we have done for every past FEMA storm, and every FEMA project that we've done since 2017. We only had one outage during this storm on those lines that we were able to rebuild. So it is money well spent, and FEMA wants us to, which I think is the right thing to do, take the money, fix it so it doesn't happen again and again and again.
Are you burying any of your lines?
Sure, little by little. I mean, a fraction, because we can only work on so much over time, but yes.
Celia and then Morris.
Really quickly, so if FEMA does not come through, how are you paying for that?
Members, that's our only other source.
And
Grants or, ratepayers. Yeah, effectively.
Cost to it?
We have about $1.7 million is the cost. And FEMA runs by county, so that's how that works. And usually if they don't get reimbursed by FEMA, we can either put into rates next year, or we can do sometimes an accounting order and spread out that cost over years, so it doesn't hit 1 year.
Representative Morris.
Sorry, Madam Chair, you asked my question.
And I just wanted to wrap up with resiliency. So this is a quick comparison of Winter Storm Philippe in 2017, which is the most similar recent storm that we had. You can see the wind lines, red is bad, so more wind this time around. And you'll see it took us less time to restore, less broken poles, less people out, which is great news. Now, the challenge is it doesn't feel like that when it's Christmas and you don't have power and everyone is working their butts off to try to put power on. It is painful, and every one of those days is, more than it should be. So we continue to work on that. And I think it's important to have the view that over time, we share this with our team too, who was in the trenches on Christmas Day, saying we are slowly, but we are making some progress here, and continuing those things will be really important. So this is my last slide to just talk about these reliability investments that we've made since 2017. I talked about the FEMA hazard mitigation. We've also done proactive system maintenance, which is just going around and looking at the lines to see what's wrong and getting out there and fixing it before it breaks. We've spent more on vegetation management, which is a important fix, but also, trees keep growing. So that's not a permanent fix. And also doing more underground and moving roadside, because we still have a lot of lines that are through the trees and the woods and very vulnerable.
Representative Celia.
yeah, just a comment, Madam Chair. I mean, that slide is incredible.
The previous.
The resilience,
The wind one.
the wind, that is really incredible. And I would love to learn, maybe offline, I don't know if the chair wants to take time later on, but more about the detail of kind of what has led to that difference. So.
Yeah, it's really it's a lot of these things, right? Just continuing to invest in the system. And going forward, you heard a lot from GMP, I won't repeat, but we are working on a lot of the same things around storage, ongoing investments for both growth and reliability, and then really focusing on both FEMA. Any additional funding sources that don't come from ratepayers is gold. And it takes a lot of work to be able to mine those. And that is a very immediate opportunity for us.
It's the most reassuring thing I think I've seen in a long time regarding climate change and the grid. So I definitely want to learn more about that.
Right.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. And next up, we have the Vermont Public Power Supply Authority.
If you wouldn't mind driving, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Julia Leopold. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. Our name is a mouthful, so we go by VPPSA for short, a little easier to remember. Great. And next slide, please. So just my plan today, I have slides here that are kind of an overview about VPPSA, who we are, what we do, and then thought could just talk a little bit more casually about the storm that we experienced over Christmas. So next slide, please. So this is here really for you to have as a reference. A lot of new faces on this committee. I should also mention I'm also new in this role. So this is actually my first time giving legislative testimony. I'm really grateful that you all are having me here today. So thank you for that. But if you want to really get a solid understanding of the utilities here in Vermont, you've got to know that we have 3 different business models. We've got the public power utilities, the electric co-ops, and the investor-owned utilities. And we're each governed in a slightly different way. For the municipals, the public power utilities, our utilities have their own governing boards who are basically maintaining autonomy, making decisions about their power supply, and deciding about whether or not there should be a rate increase. So that's a little bit different from the structure that you see with the co-ops and the IOUs. Next slide, please. And if you look, again, you've seen this map already. I have the link to it at the bottom. This is a really fantastic resource, and I highly recommend that everyone, check that map out and get really familiar with it, because I think it will be really beneficial to you in these roles. But this map shows, again, where all of the different utilities are. You'll notice that Green Mountain Power is the largest utility here in Vermont, serving the most customers. But when it comes to diversity of utilities, we have the most type of public power utilities. So we actually have 17 of them total, 14 of them total in the state of the 17 electric utilities. 11 of those 14 are members of Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. So I should mention, we are not actually a utility. Utilities provide electricity to the end use customer. We provide electricity to the utilities, who then resell it to their customers. We are a nonprofit. The public power model is also a nonprofit. Next slide, please. And should say here that even though we have the most public power utility models of all the different types of utility models in Vermont, we are in the minority in terms of the number of customers that we serve. 1 in 7 Vermonters are served by public power. But that explains why VPPSA exists. So if you go on to the next slide, this will tell a little bit about how we were created. So way back in the late 1970s, all of these small municipalities with their own electric utilities realized that there's a lot of work to be done when it comes to running an electric utility. It takes a lot of staff, it takes a lot of people. And if they were all trying to do it on their own, it would be very expensive and they wouldn't be able to necessarily provide a high end of service. So that's when they came together and formed VPPSA, which was actually established by the Vermont legislature back in 1979. And we exist to serve our member utility customers. So we are basically providing economies of scale. We're doing the wholesale power supply purchasing. We're providing legislative outreach, of course, regulatory compliance. And if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about what it is we do. Our vision is to promote, advance, and celebrate public power communities in Vermont and beyond. And in terms of the range of the different services that we offer on the next slide, you'll see again, power supply purchasing, that's our bread and butter. That's really why we were formed. But then as our organization grew, our member utilities realized that there were so many different behind the scenes areas that they needed our assistance in. And so we've grown over time to serve them in those needs. Now we also do rates and planning. We do IT and cybersecurity for our member utilities. We've recently added GIS and field services to help our utilities with mapping of their assets. And we also manage the renewable energy standard on behalf of our members. So that means that we are basically complying with the statute on their behalf. So what's I think a little bit different about our member utilities versus all the others that you've heard from today is that we are complying in aggregate, which means that when we comply with the renewable energy standard, it looks like we're all one utility, but we're not. We're 11 different ones. And we do track and maintain that on the back end. But when we actually put our reports in front of the Public Utility Commission, they're looking at it as if we were one giant utility, which is just, I think, a great example of how we can provide that, that centralized benefit to our communities while allowing them to maintain their own autonomy. Next slide, please. And I'm trying to move really quickly, so please feel free to, ask questions or slow me down. So as for who we serve, this is a map that shows the geographic distribution, and you can see that we're really operating across the entirety of the state. A lot of our municipality members are located in the northern portion of the state, especially in our more rural areas, like in the Northeast Kingdom, but we do serve all the way down to the very southern border of Vermont, bordering on Massachusetts. So this is our list of all of our member municipalities, and you'll see that those blue numbers, these are the customer counts or the rough customer counts, and it looks pretty small. Biggest one on here is Lyndonville Electric, serving just under 6,000 customers. They seem tiny when they're on their own, but the benefit of having VPPSA is that we kind of bring them all together. And when you add that all up, it's about 30,000 customers, which is slightly bigger than Burlington Electric, just for reference there.
Representative Smith has a question.
Thank you. I had thought all along that Barton Village and the Village of Orleans was one electric company, Barton Electric. Is that the case or not?
There are two different electric utilities,
Yeah.
both operating within the town of Barton. So you've got the town of Barton and two incorporated villages within the town.
All right, thank you.
It's fascinating.
Okay.
And we can move on to the next slide. Thanks. You've seen this map on the right already, the energy burden report. And again, that is from Efficiency Vermont. The more deep the orange color, the higher the energy burden, meaning the more of the household income going towards energy expenditures. It includes transportation, it includes heating our homes and buildings, it includes electricity. And then on the left, you have where we are serving. On the next slide, we're going to merge them together so you can overlay. And I've made the stars black here so it can show up a little bit better. But you see that we do serve quite a high portion of folks who have high energy burdens. So as a result, a lot of the way that we operate is with affordability in mind. We are very conscious of making sure that electric bills are low for our customers. I'm really pleased to say that of our 11 municipal members, 3 of them have the lowest electric bills in the state. You've got Ludlow Electric is number 1, Swanton Village up in the northwest corner is number 2, and Village of Orleans is 3. And actually, I think that's reverse. I think Orleans is 2 and Swanton is 3. But either way, you're seeing residential electric bills that are roughly 25% lower than what the typical Vermonter pays. Next slide. This is an overview of our power supply portfolio. So on the left, this is before compliance. And again, a reminder that this is in aggregate. So we're looking as if all the 11 VPPSA member utilities were one utility. We could break this out 11 different ways because that chart on the left will look different for every single one of our member municipalities. But this is kind of the big picture here. So when you look at that pie chart on the left, before buying and selling RECs, we are already 50% renewable and 80% carbon free. Then you comply with the res. So you comply with statute. You buy and you sell your renewable energy credits. And at that point, we're bumping up now to 65% renewable and 95% carbon free. The thing here that's worth noting is that pretty much all of our members are right at compliance with the renewable energy standard. Swanton Village is 100% renewable. So that kind of lifts all tides here. We all elevate slightly in our compliance. But we do, like I said, track it on the back end to ensure that every single member is meeting those res requirements.
Representative Stebbins.
Thank you. The non-renewable, the 34.74%, is that like system mix or is that nuclear or predominantly system mix?
It's mostly nuclear. It's mostly nuclear with a small amount of system mix. I think it's roughly 29 to 30% nuclear with the remainder a system mix.
Thank you.
Sure. Next slide, please. Now, just to move on to the legislative recap, I think the big thing that we have to say here is thank you. Last year, House Energy and Technology recommended $5 million from the general fund to go towards advanced metering infrastructure. Back in 2009, many electric utilities in the state of Vermont had the opportunity to apply for ARRA funds to then install those advanced meters. The VPPSA member utilities at the time chose not to move forward with that. The mindset was at the time that we were going to see costs come down and that they would be able to do it after kind of seeing how it worked out. What ended up happening instead was that we had better technology come out and the cost did not come down. So last year, we recognized that it was time to move forward with AMI, and we are greatly appreciative of the fact that the budget bill did eventually pass with $8 million of funding for AMI. We put in an application to the Department of Public Service back in November, and we're waiting to get notice of whether those funds will be headed our way. So big thank you for that. Installing advanced metering infrastructure, I think, will go a long way in building our foundation and allowing us to move towards an even more modern grid. Next slide. And just some priorities and considerations for 2023. So the top two I've highlighted because those will always be the same. They're never going to change. We are always going to be committed to providing a safe and reliable electric grid. We're always going to be committed to keeping electricity affordable for our utilities and their customers. What you might see change, and I think what we want to focus on this year, is supporting efforts to align environmental and climate policies. Something that's really valuable to us is the local hydro that we have here in Vermont. Many of our municipalities were founded because of the fact that they have a hydro system in their community. So having that is so valuable because it's providing renewable energy, it's low environmental impact, and it's also affordable. So we really want to seek to align our climate and environmental policies to make sure that those hydro facilities remain viable. Continuing the modernization of distribution, no worries. Continuing the modernization of distribution systems. So committed to installing AMI. We're hoping to get our first meters in the ground by later this year, again, depending upon the funding from the Department of Public Service. And we are currently investigating siting for utility scale battery storage. So we've been partnering with a couple of different organizations, a couple of different battery storage developers, studying some sites, and also applying for funding to make that, again, more cost effective for our member utilities and their customers. And then finally, assisting commercial and industrial customers in decarbonizing their operations. You've heard from the utilities today, all of our different incentive programs that we have. I'm actually excited to announce that today we launched an online rebate platform for our members' customers, so they can now apply for their rebates entirely online. But we do also work very closely with our businesses. You heard about, maple sugar makers and doing line extensions. We're absolutely in that arena. We recently approved a $60,000 incentive for a Northeast Kingdom feed manufacturer to get rid of their diesel generator, or at least not use it for regular business operations, so that they could focus on a line upgrade, a service extension, so that they can use electric service. So we're engaging with customers a lot these days to try to encourage that transition. And then the next slide, I think this is my second to last, just some considerations as we go through this session. Electricity needs to be affordable for our communities and our climate. Again, affordability is always going to be a top priority for VPPSA, and it's kind of twofold. When you look at our communities, we have a lot of low-income households that live in our territories. Anything that is going to make it more expensive for them to, just live their lives is not going to be beneficial. So we're committed to keeping those costs low. but we're also recognizing that electricity is the backbone of the energy transformation. If you're going to be switching, from your gasoline powered car to an electric vehicle, you better have affordable electricity to charge. Otherwise, you're never going to get folks to make that transition. So we're committed not just for our communities, but also for our climate. When it comes to renewable electricity policies, the Department of Public Service is engaging in a public outreach engagement process, and we respect that process. We think that we need to be thoughtful with policies, and getting engagement from the community is a really vital piece of how to move that forward. So we recommend that when it comes to any changes to electric policy and renewable electric policy, that it follow that timeline that the Department of Public Service is recommending. Small local hydro is an environmentally sustainable way to provide Vermonters with renewable energy. I touched on that a little bit, but we'll always be beating the hydro drum, especially when it is a low environmental impact hydro and when it's located right here in the state of Vermont. And then finally, transportation and heating of our homes and buildings are the highest greenhouse gas emitting sources. You've heard from the other utilities today that electricity is doing really well. It is only 2% of Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions. And if we go to the next slide, I'll leave you with that last image, yet again from the Energy Action Network report. And it just shows that our work that needs to be done in the transportation and thermal sectors if we are going to meet the requirements from the Global Warming Solutions Act. So electricity is doing great. The res is doing really well. I think we're moving it along and really encouraging a lot of our customers to make the transition. So that's why we encourage that focus on GHG emissions from transportation and thermal. And then the last slide just has my contact information on it. So you're welcome to reach out to me at any time. Are there any questions here before I move on to storm recovery?
Oh, we really need to pick it up. So one question from Representative.
Yeah.
You mentioned nuclear. Where does that come from?
Oh gosh,
I think
I
you
would have
mentioned it
to,
too.
I would have to dig into it and get back to you
Okay,
in our power
thank you.
supply. Yeah.
Okay, Steve.
Seabrook, I think.
So yes,
Oh, Seabrook?
and I think there might be one other, but I'll look into it for you.
Quick recap of storm recovery.
Quick recap of storm. The munis were very fortunate during the storm that we did not see nearly the financial impacts some of our other utilities in Vermont had to deal with. In fact, some of our municipalities had virtually no outages and were able to actually send their crews out to other areas. We had our Ludlow crew go out to help Green Mountain Power and assist with storm recovery. Folks in Swanton Village were out helping those in the village of Enosburg Falls. Village of Orleans was providing service to the folks in Barton Village. So there was a lot of local mutual aid. I think you heard Lewis say earlier that we really could not get mutual aid from outside of the state. This was just such a large storm. My background prior to being in this role, I was a meteorologist. I've covered a lot of storms, and this was a bad one. It was a bad one, and it was one that had really great model consistency well ahead of time, which is rare. It's usually you've got one model saying one thing, another saying something else. But I think that really served the utilities well. We were able to be very well prepared for this storm, and it's awful to be without power. We're fortunate that our member utilities that did have outages, most were back online, if not all, by Christmas night. But it's never a great situation when you're out of power. And I think that, again, just from my weather background, seeing the response to this storm, I think was incredibly impressive, and all the utilities did a fantastic job.
Just really briefly. So Julia, to what extent would you say that the resiliency was because of how compact and contained your systems are? They're largely village systems, right?
It was definitely the utilities that had those smaller, more downtown centers that saw fewer outages, and utilities that, yes, less trees. It was wind and ice, and that takes down branches and trees. It was the more sprawling utilities, because several of our utilities, even though they are municipalities, they extend beyond their municipal borders. So they're serving areas that are not necessarily within their municipality. And those are the areas that were more hard hit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Send me your email. if I can do that.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah.
If I got any questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so our next topic is telecoms. And we have
Thanks.
So yeah, well, I guess I'll wait till they come in, but there's two of them.
And
I
I'm
think
gonna,
there's three. Okay,
because I've got a very serious meeting in Derby tonight.
Oh.
Our budget is screwed up.
so what we, we'll probably give them, there's three coming in. Can other members stay till 4:15 or 4:30?
Yeah, I think that's when the weather's planning to get
Not gonna
Nasty.
get, gonna get nasty, you think?
at, it's. the
I can do
forecast says
4:15.
At 4,
I can.
when it's gonna start, but that's fine. Just thought I'd let you know.